You think birthdays bring people closer? Let me tell you about one that tore a family apart and how one simple bottle of whiskey became the reason for revenge no one saw coming. It was a warm Sunday morning when Michael carefully placed a dark glass bottle on the kitchen counter. The whiskey wasn't just any drink. It was rare, expensive, something he had saved up for months to buy. He wanted it to be special because it was his mother's 65th birthday. "She deserves this," he whispered, almost as if he was convincing himself that the struggles he faced at work and the overtime shifts had all been worth it for this moment. His wife, Claire, walked in, still holding her phone in one hand. She barely glanced at the bottle before saying, "You spent that much money on whiskey? For your mom?" "Michael, sometimes I just don't understand your priorities." Michael smiled faintly, not wanting an argument. "She's been through so much, Claire. It's not about the drink. It's about showing her I remember, that I care." Claire rolled her eyes and tapped a quick message on her phone. "Well, don't expect me to babysit the kids while you play favorite son tonight." Her tone was sharp, but Michael chose silence. He had grown used to it. Later that afternoon, he wrapped the bottle in golden paper and tied a ribbon with his own hands. Every detail mattered to him. His daughter, Emily, peeked from the doorway and asked, "Daddy, is Grandma really going to like this?" Michael smiled at her innocence. "She'll love it, sweetheart. She'll know how much it means." But when he returned to the living room, the bottle was gone. The golden wrapping paper was nowhere to be seen. He frowned and looked around the house. "Claire, did you see the whiskey?" She didn't look up from her phone. "Oh, that? I sent it to your father's place. He likes whiskey, right? Consider it an early gift for him." Michael froze, his face draining of color. "You gave it to Dad? Without asking me?" His voice cracked between disbelief and anger. Claire shrugged, almost amused by his reaction. "Relax, it's just whiskey. Your mom doesn't even drink. But your father, he'll actually appreciate it." For a long moment, Michael said nothing. He just stood there, fists clenched, staring at her. Inside him, something shifted. It wasn't just about whiskey anymore. It was about respect, about betrayal, about a pattern he had ignored for too long. And as he looked at Claire's smug expression, a thought quietly took root in his mind. If she wanted a game, he would play it, but this time on his terms. Michael couldn't sleep that night. The living room was dark, except for the small lamp near the couch. He sat there, staring at the spot where the whiskey bottle had been, replaying Claire's words in his head. "Your mom doesn't even drink." That sentence cut deeper than the act itself. It wasn't just about giving the whiskey to his father. It was about how little Claire respected his choices, his feelings, his bond with his mother. He tried convincing himself to let it go. After all, it was just one birthday, just one gift. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized this wasn't the first time Claire had undermined him. It was years of small humiliations, little jabs in front of friends, dismissive comments about his mother, and now this, turning a heartfelt gesture into an insult. The next morning, he walked into the kitchen, and Claire was already dressed, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. She looked up at him and smirked. "Don't be mad, Michael. Your dad called last night. He said he loved the whiskey. At least someone appreciates good taste in this family." Michael forced a stiff smile. Glad he enjoyed it, but inside his thoughts were boiling. He imagined his father, Richard, holding that bottle, bragging to his golf buddies about how his son had finally given him something worth showing off. Richard was a man who never needed more attention, never lacked praise. His mother, on the other hand, lived quietly, rarely celebrated, often overlooked. And now, the one thing Michael wanted to give her was stolen by the woman who was supposed to stand beside him. That evening, Michael drove to his parents' house. The moment he walked in, he saw his father proudly displaying the whiskey on a glass shelf in the living room, as if it were some kind of trophy. "Look at this, son," Richard said, patting the bottle with his thick hand. "Finally, you're learning what a real man drinks." Michael forced a laugh, but his chest felt heavy. His mother, Grace, came out from the kitchen carrying a tray of cookies. Her face lit up when she saw Michael. "Oh, sweetheart, you didn't have to get your father anything. You've always been thoughtful." Michael's throat tightened. It was supposed to be for you, Mom. Grace blinked, confused. For me? Richard chuckled loudly, cutting in before she could ask more. What nonsense is this? Whiskey for her. She doesn't even drink. Don't be ridiculous. Michael looked at his mother's gentle smile, and in that moment he knew she had understood. She didn't drink, yes, but it was never about that. It was about being remembered, being valued. She glanced at him quietly, her eyes soft but heavy with unspoken words. On the drive back, Michael gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The humiliation burned in his chest. Not only had Claire dismissed his feelings, but now his father had turned his gift into another opportunity to belittle him. He had always been the quiet one, the one who never argued, never fought back. But that night, for the first time in years, a dangerous calm settled inside him. 2 days later, Michael overheard Claire on the phone. She was laughing, her voice playful in a way it never was with him. Yes, he really thought it was for his mom. Can you believe that? Who gives whiskey to a woman like her? Honestly, sometimes I wonder if he even thinks straight. Michael froze in the hallway, listening. Her tone wasn't just dismissive. It was cruel. She wasn't just undermining him in private. She was mocking him to someone else. He stepped into the room, and Claire hung up quickly. Who was that? He asked calmly. Just Lisa, she said, naming her best friend without hesitation. Don't get paranoid. But Michael wasn't convinced. Something in her voice told him there was more. That evening, he opened her laptop while she was in the shower. He hadn't snooped before, but his instincts were sharp now. He found messages, not with Lisa, but with his father. His stomach twisted as he read the words. Claire had been texting Richard, sending him updates, joking about Michael, even sharing private arguments. I gave him the whiskey, one message read, followed by laughing emojis. You should have seen his face. He actually thought his mom mattered more. Michael shut the laptop slowly, his breath uneven. The betrayal was no longer just about a gift. It was deeper, uglier. His wife and his father were laughing at him behind his back, turning his love for his mother into entertainment. The next morning, Michael tried to act normal. He kissed his kid before school, smiled at Claire, and went to work. But his mind was racing. He started noticing patterns. How Claire spent more time at his father's house than she admitted, how his father's tone had changed around him lately, sharper, condescending, as if he knew secrets Michael didn't. At work, Michael confided in his colleague, David, a man he had known since college. What would you do? Michael asked carefully. If your wife and father seemed closer than they should be? David raised his eyebrows. Closer how? Michael hesitated, sharing things they shouldn't, making fun of me, acting like I'm some kind of fool. David leaned back in his chair. Then maybe it's time you stop being the fool. People only play games with you if you let them. The word stuck with Michael. That evening, he watched Claire laugh while texting at the dinner table. His children asked for help with homework, but her attention stayed on her phone. He glanced at the screen and caught a glimpse of his father's name again. Who's so funny tonight? He asked. Claire didn't look up. Work stuff. You wouldn't get it. Michael smiled faintly. You're right. Maybe I wouldn't. But inside, his mind was already working, building a plan he hadn't thought possible before. He would give them both exactly what they wanted, his silence, his obedience, until the right moment came. And when it did, neither Claire nor Richard would see it coming. That weekend, Grace called Michael and asked softly, Are you okay, honey? You seemed quiet the other night. Michael paused before answering. I'm fine, Mom. Just thinking. Grace's voice trembled. I know Claire doesn't always understand you. And your father, well, he's always been harsh. But don't lose yourself, Michael. Don't let them take away your kindness. Michael closed his eyes, torn between her gentle words and the storm inside him. Don't worry, Mom. I won't lose myself. But in truth, he had already begun to change. The following week, Michael began to notice small details he had once ignored. Claire had started dressing differently whenever she claimed she was running errands. Her makeup was heavier, her perfume stronger. She no longer left shopping bags lying around like she used to. Instead, she came home empty-handed but glowing with a strange satisfaction. Michael didn't confront her right away. Instead, he let the days roll by in silence, masking his observations behind calm eyes. Inside, however, every passing hour sharpened his focus. He remembered David's words. People only play games with you if you let them. He had let them for years, but no longer. One Thursday evening, as Claire sat at the dinner table, Michael casually asked, "You've been spending a lot of time at my dad's place, haven't you?" She froze for a fraction of a second before regaining her composure. "Well, someone has to check in on him. He's getting older, you know, and since you're always too busy at work." Michael chewed slowly, staring at her without blinking. "Strange, because Mom says she hardly sees you there." Claire's fork clattered against her plate. She recovered quickly with a forced laugh. "Grace barely notices anything. She's always in the kitchen, baking or cleaning. Honestly, Michael, you shouldn't listen to everything she says." The casual dismissal of his mother stung, but Michael stayed composed. He nodded, smiled faintly, and said nothing more. Silence, he knew, was his strongest weapon for now. That night, when Claire went to bed, Michael slipped into the garage. He found the old set of house keys that Claire didn't know he still had, the keys to his father's place. He sat in the darkness, the keys cold in his palm, and planned. The next afternoon, when Claire claimed she was meeting Lisa for coffee, Michael followed her. He kept a careful distance, his heart thudding as her car turned, not toward the cafe, but toward his father's neighborhood. He parked 2 streets away and walked, his hands shoved in his pockets. When he reached the house, he saw Claire's car in the driveway. Through the living room window, he caught a glimpse of her silhouette. She was laughing, sitting far too close to Richard on the couch. Michael's stomach knotted, his breath catching in his throat. He wanted to storm inside, demand answers, shatter the charade. But he forced himself to step back. Not yet, not like this. He turned and walked away, his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. That night, lying beside Claire as she slept peacefully, he stared at the ceiling and whispered to himself, "You'll both pay for this." Days turned into weeks. Michael played the part of the obedient husband, the dutiful son. He smiled when required, nodded at insults, swallowed the bitterness. But every detail he observed, every slip in Claire's lies, every arrogant smirk from Richard, he stored away like weapons in an arsenal. Then came Grace's small birthday gathering. The one meant be quiet, just family, nothing extravagant. Michael arrived early to help her set the table. Grace looked tired, her eyes shadowed with years of quiet endurance. "Michael," she said softly as she folded napkins, "you've been different lately. Quieter. Are you sure everything is all right with Claire?" Michael hesitated, torn between protecting her from the ugly truth and needing someone, anyone, to understand his turmoil. Finally, he forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mom. Just watching things closely." Grace studied him, worry in her gaze, but said no more. When the others arrived, the tension in the air was thick. Claire greeted Richard with a hug that lingered too long, her eyes sparkling a way they never did with Michael. Richard clapped Michael on the back, grinning as if nothing was amiss. "Still working those long hours, son? Don't burn yourself out before your time." Michael bit back the urge to reply sharply. Instead, he turned to his mother and gently squeezed her hand. He would not let the evening turn into another humiliation for her. But midway through dinner, Claire's phone buzzed. She excused herself, stepping into the hallway. Michael's eyes followed her. Seconds later, Richard also excused himself, claiming he needed to make a quick call. Michael felt his pulse quicken. He waited, then quietly slipped out of the dining room. In the dim hallway, he heard whispers, Claire's laugh, Richard's low voice. He edged closer, his chest tight with fury. "He still thinks the whiskey was his big gift," Richard murmured. Claire giggled softly. "He has no idea, Richard. Honestly, it's pathetic. Sometimes I wonder how he hasn't figured us out." Michael's breath caught. The walls around him seemed to close in, the air heavy. For a brief moment, Rage surged so strongly he almost stepped out and exposed them both. But then, he remembered the way his mother's hand trembled when she set the table, the way her smile hid her sadness. He couldn't destroy her evening with an ugly scene. Not yet. Instead, he slipped back into the dining room, his face calm. When Claire and Richard returned moments later, he was helping Grace serve dessert, smiling as if nothing had happened. That night, back home, Michael lay awake long after Claire had fallen asleep. His mind replayed every word, every laugh, every stolen glance between his wife and father. The betrayal was complete. They weren't just mocking him. They were united against him. And yet, beneath the fury, a cold clarity emerged. If they thought he was blind, if they thought he was weak, they had underestimated him. The next morning, Michael began keeping a journal, not just of what he saw and heard, but of times, dates, places, every lie Claire told, every excuse Richard made, every small cruelty that chipped away at his dignity. It wasn't just a journal, it was evidence. Weeks later, an unexpected twist arrived. Grace called him in a hushed voice. "Michael, I don't know if I should tell you this, but yesterday I found Claire's bracelet at your father's house. She said she must have lost it during a visit, but her voice broke. Michael, I'm so afraid something is wrong." Michael's grip on the phone tightened. He closed his eyes and forced his voice steady. "Thank you for telling me, Mom. Please don't worry. I'll handle it." As he hung up, a strange calm settled over him. The pieces were falling into place, faster than he had expected. Claire and Richard were growing careless. They thought they were untouchable. But Michael was done being silent. Now, every smile he gave them was rehearsed. Every word was calculated. He began planting questions in conversations, testing their lies, watching them trip over each other. He didn't confront them, not yet. Instead, he let them believe they were safe, while he quietly set the stage for the downfall that was coming. And as the days passed, Michael realized something unexpected. Revenge wasn't just about striking back. It was about patience, control, and timing. The whiskey bottle had started this war, but it would not be the last drink anyone remembered. Michael had always thought of himself as an ordinary man. He went to work, paid the bills, loved his children, and did what he could to keep the peace. But lately, even he didn't recognize himself anymore. The journal he kept hidden inside his desk drawer was filling faster than he had imagined. Every day, another lie. Every evening, another smirk from Claire or another condescending remark from Richard. What once felt like small humiliations now looked like deliberate patterns. They weren't just partners in betrayal. They were partners in mocking him, stripping away his dignity piece by piece. And yet, to the world, Michael was a calm, quiet husband and son, the man who never caused trouble. One evening, he walked into the living room to find Claire video calling someone. The screen's reflection on her face made her glow, and her laughter was light, unrestrained. When she noticed Michael, she quickly angled the laptop away and closed it. "Who was that?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. She hesitated, then forced a smile. "Lisa again. She wanted advice about some parties she's planning." Michael tilted his head, feigning interest. "Funny, because Lisa told me she's been traveling for work all month." Claire's face stiffened for a second before she laughed it off. "You must have misheard her. Honestly, Michael, you worry too much." He said nothing, simply sat across from her, watching her fingers drum nervously on the closed laptop. He didn't press further. Silence, again, was more powerful than confrontation. He had learned that every lie she told without being challenged was another noose tightening around her neck. That night, after she slept, Michael carefully opened her laptop again. This time, he wasn't just scrolling through messages. He copied everything, emails, chats, even photos, onto a small flash drive. When he found images of Claire at dinners with Richard, smiling with a glow she hadn't shown him in years, his chest tightened. But instead of rage, he felt something colder, sharper, resolve. The following weekend, Michael visited his mother again. Grace was sitting on the porch, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes distant. She looked at him with concern. "Michael, She said softly, "I know you're holding something inside. I can see it. You're not the same anymore." He sat beside her, gazing out at the yard. "People think silence is weakness, Mom. They don't realize silence is when you're watching, waiting." Grace frowned, placing her hand gently on his. "Don't let their cruelty turn you into them. Promise me that." Michael forced a smile. "I promise you'll be proud of me when this is over." She didn't understand his words fully, but something in his tone made her shiver. The real turning point came the night of his father's poker gathering. Richard had invited a few close friends, men who loved whiskey and gossip as much as he did. Michael had been asked to join, though it was rare for him to attend. When he arrived, he saw Claire already there, dressed elegantly, pouring drinks to the guests as if she belonged to the house more than Grace ever had. Richard beamed at his friends. "This is my daughter-in-law. She keeps the place alive. My son, well, he's a quiet type." The men chuckled, raising their glasses. Michael sat quietly, playing his role, but every laugh felt like a dagger. Claire winked at Richard when she thought Michael wasn't looking, and his father leaned closer to her than any father-in-law should. At one point, one of the men asked about the whiskey bottle. Richard proudly pointed to it on the shelf. "Gift for my son," he said smugly. "Best thing he's ever given me." Michael's jaw tightened, but he forced a polite smile. "Glad you're enjoying it." Later that night, as the men left and the house grew quiet, Michael lingered near the study. He overheard Claire and Richard talking in hushed voices. "Do you think he suspects?" Richard asked. Claire laughed softly. "Michael? He's too blind. He'll never do anything. He's harmless." Richard chuckled. "Good. Because what we built here, our little arrangement, nobody can take it away." Michael's breath slowed. Their arrogance was astonishing. They weren't even cautious anymore. The next day, Michael began to shift his strategy. He no longer simply recorded their lies. He started leaving small traces, testing how far he could push before they noticed. He left Claire's phone slightly out of place after checking it, moved Richard's papers on his desk when he visited. Little things that made them uneasy, but not enough to accuse him of anything. He wanted them to feel watched, even if they couldn't prove it. Claire grew restless. One evening, she snapped at him over nothing. The soup being too salty, the kids being too loud. "You just sit there like a ghost, Michael. Sometimes I wonder if you're even alive inside." He smiled faintly. "Ghosts see more than the living." She froze, eyes narrowing, but he walked away before she could respond. Meanwhile, Grace noticed the tension growing heavier. She called Michael again. "I feel something is breaking apart in this family. I don't know what it is, but I can sense it. Please, tell me if I should be worried." Michael's voice was calm, almost soothing. "Don't worry, Mom. You'll know the truth soon. Very soon." The true twist arrived one Friday afternoon when Michael returned home early from work. Claire wasn't there, though she had told him she would be cooking dinner. He checked the driveway. Her car was gone. Something told him to follow his instincts. He drove straight to Richard's house. The moment he entered quietly with a spare key, he froze. Voices drifted from the living room. Claire's laugh, Richard's low chuckle. He stepped closer and saw them through the gap in the doorway. They weren't simply talking. They were sitting close, too close, sharing a glass of whiskey from the very bottle Michael had bought. His hands trembled, not from shock, but from confirmation. The whispers, the bracelet, the messages, it all fit now. He stepped back silently, leaving before they could notice him. In the car, he gripped the steering wheel and whispered, "You think I'm blind? You think I'm weak? I'll let you keep thinking that until the moment I decide otherwise." That night, Claire returned home, smiling faintly, smelling of Richard's cologne. She greeted Michael as if nothing were wrong. Dinner ran late. "Sorry." Michael kissed her cheek lightly, his smile calm, his eyes unreadable. "Don't worry. I understand." But in his mind, the plan had already begun to form. One that would turn their smugness into their downfall. And yet, he knew he had to be careful. Revenge rushed too quickly was messy, obvious. He needed patience, precision. They thought they were playing a game. But the game hadn't even truly started. And when it did, neither of them would ever laugh again. The days after Michael saw them together at Richard's house felt like walking through a storm, while everyone else pretended the sky was clear. To the world, nothing had changed. Claire laughed at the dinner table. Richard called occasionally to ask about work, and Grace went about her quiet routines. But Michael felt every word, every gesture layered with hidden meaning. He wasn't imagining anymore. He had seen it with his own eyes. Yet instead of breaking down, he grew calmer. A frightening kind of calm, the kind that unnerved even his children, who noticed their father staring off in thought more often than before. Emily asked one evening, "Daddy, are you sad?" Michael looked at her small, concerned face and forced a warm smile. "Not sad, sweetheart, just thinking about things." But his mind was far from gentle. It was calculating, mapping out paths, weighing outcomes. He began to notice how much Claire had grown careless. She no longer bothered hiding her late returns. She simply offered excuses and assumed he would accept them. Sometimes she would say she was with Lisa. Other times she mentioned grocery shopping, though no groceries ever appeared. One evening, Michael decided to test her. As she slipped on her coat and reached for her car keys, he asked lightly, "Running errands again?" She froze for half a second, then nodded. "Yes, I'll be back soon. Don't wait up." Michael smiled faintly. Strange, because Lisa had just called earlier. She said she was still stuck in Denver. Claire blinked, caught off guard. Well, maybe she came back earlier than expected." "Maybe," Michael said quietly, stepping closer. His eyes locked onto hers for just a moment too long. She shifted uncomfortably, then hurried out the door without another word. When she was gone, Michael sat down and wrote in his journal, "She doesn't even try to cover anymore. Lies without care. That will be her undoing." But the betrayal was not only Claire's. Richard, too, had grown arrogant. He had started calling Claire directly when he thought Michael wasn't around. One afternoon, Michael returned home earlier than planned and caught Claire in the kitchen, whispering into her phone, "Yes, tomorrow works. Same time. He'll be at work, as always." She turned suddenly and found Michael standing there. Her eyes widened, but she quickly pasted on a smile. It was just Lisa. She's been asking about Saturday plans. Michael tilted his head. "Funny, you've been talking to Lisa a lot lately. I should give her a call myself. Thank her for keeping you so entertained." For the first time, Claire's smile faltered. She stammered, "That's not necessary." "Really?" Michael only nodded, his face unreadable. But inside, he felt the satisfaction of watching her crack, even if only slightly. That night, Grace called him again. Her voice trembled. "Michael, I saw something I wish I hadn't. Claire was leaving your father's house yesterday, and she looked flustered. I don't want to believe what my eyes told me, but..." Michael interrupted gently. "Mom, you don't need to carry this burden. Just trust me. I already know more than you think." There was a long silence on the line before Grace whispered, "Then please, whatever you're planning, don't lose your soul in the process." Michael closed his eyes, his chest heavy. "I promise, Mom. But sometimes people force your hand." He hung up, staring at the darkened window, his reflection staring back at with eyes he barely recognized anymore. The twist came a few days later, when Michael discovered something unexpected. While checking Claire's messages again, he found not just exchanges with Richard, but also receipts, expensive dinners charged to Richard's account, hotel bookings under Richard's name, even jewelry. It wasn't just an affair of convenience. Richard had been showering her with gifts, hiding their relationship under layers of secrecy and manipulation. But what struck Michael the most wasn't the money. It was the way Richard described him. "He's too weak to notice. Don't worry, Claire. He's blind. He'll never stand up to me." Each line cut deeper, not because they underestimated him, but because they had said it with such certainty. Michael sat back, gripping the flash drive where it stored everything. He realized he didn't just want revenge anymore. He wanted exposure. He wanted the world to see what kind of man Richard truly was, and what kind of wife Claire had become. But he also knew he had to be clever. Confronting them directly would only lead to denials, lies, and manipulation. They were too practiced at that. No, he needed to build a trap, one so carefully crafted that they would walk into it themselves. The first step came subtly. Michael began suggesting family dinners at Richard's house, making excuses for Grace to invite him and Claire together. At first, Claire resisted, but Michael pressed gently. "Come on, it'll mean a lot to Mom. She's been lonely." Reluctantly, Claire agreed. At those dinners, Michael acted as if nothing were wrong. He laughed at Richard's jokes, complimented Claire's cooking, even toasted with them using the very whiskey bottle that had started it all. But all the while, his phone quietly recorded their conversations from his pocket. Every sly remark, every two-personal exchange, every look they thought nobody noticed. It was all being captured. One evening, after such a dinner, Grace pulled Michael aside. "I don't know what's happening, but I see the way they look at each other. Do you want me to say something?" Michael shook his head. "No, Mom. Let them keep thinking they're clever. The longer they believe they're winning, the harder they'll fall." Grace looked at him with sad eyes. "You scare me sometimes, Michael. There's a darkness in you now." Michael smiled faintly, though his eyes held no warmth. "It's not darkness, Mom. It's clarity." Meanwhile, Claire had grown bolder, almost reckless. One evening, after returning late, she leaned against the doorway, smirking at Michael. "You really don't ask questions anymore. I almost miss your suspicion." Michael met her gaze calmly. Questions aren't necessary when the answers show themselves. She frowned, puzzled by his words, but brushed it off. Yet Michael saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. The final twist of that week came when Richard invited Michael alone to his study. He poured himself a drink and said with a smirk, "You know, son, some men spend their whole lives working hard and still never understand what real power feels like. Do you ever wonder if you're one of them?" Michael studied him quietly. "I think power is knowing the right time to act." Richard chuckled, sipping his whiskey. "You sound like you're planning something." "Don't. You'll only embarrass yourself." Michael smiled faintly, his calmness unnerving even Richard for a moment. Maybe I'm just waiting for the right moment." As Michael left the study, he knew Richard sensed something was shifting, but neither Richard nor Claire realized how close they were to the edge, because the trap was nearly ready. And when it closed, it wouldn't just expose them, it would destroy the foundation they stood on. Michael was no longer the quiet son, but the overlooked husband. He was a storm they had unknowingly created, and the storm was about to break. The following week stretched like a taut wire, humming with hidden tension. Michael carried himself with an eerie stillness, like a man conserving all his strength for one decisive strike. He moved through his days with mechanical precision, work, home, family dinners, conversations with Grace. But beneath the surface, he was constantly pulling invisible threads together. Claire noticed a change but misread it. She thought his silence meant defeat, that he resigned himself to the inevitability of her drift away. She mistook his calm for weakness, failing to see the fire burning beneath it. Richard, too, grew smug, emboldened by what he assumed was Michael's oblivion. He began pressing harder, weaving Claire deeper into his web of manipulation. But Michael was watching, always watching. One evening, as Claire prepared to leave yet again, Michael called out casually from the couch, "Before you go, you might want to check your drawer." Claire froze. "What?" "Top drawer of the dresser," Michael said, not even glancing at her. "Something's waiting for you there." She hesitated, suspicion flickering in her eyes. Slowly, she walked into the bedroom and pulled open the drawer. Her breath caught. Inside lay a small velvet box, its lid slightly open to reveal a delicate necklace. Shimmering diamonds arranged in a heart-shaped pendant. She swallowed hard, confusion flashing across her face. Richard had given her the same necklace 2 weeks ago. But this box was different. It bore the initials of the jewelry store she and Richard had visited together in another city. Her hands trembled. Michael appeared in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, his eyes calm but unblinking. "Beautiful piece, isn't it? I wonder how many women received the same one from Richard. Must be his signature move." Claire's face paled. "Michael, I don't know what your He cut her off softly. Don't bother. Lies aren't even entertaining anymore. For the first time in weeks, panic surged through her. She slammed the drawer shut, but the damage was already done. Michael's words echoed in her mind long after she left the house that night. Meanwhile, Michael had begun working on another layer of his plan. He met quietly with an old college friend, Daniel, who now worked as a private investigator. They sat in a dimly lit cafe, voices low. "I need more than suspicion," Michael said firmly. "I need footage, proof, something undeniable." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about your wife and your father? That's heavy. Do you think I care about heavy?" Michael's voice was cold. "This isn't about pain anymore. It's about truth. And once I have it, I'll make sure the whole world sees." Daniel studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'll get you what you need. But understand, when the truth comes out, it'll scorch everything in its path." "That's the point," Michael replied, his jaw set. Within days, Daniel's team had planted discreet cameras near Richard's estate and in a few key places where Claire often met him. They worked silently, blending in like shadows. And slowly, the evidence began to accumulate. Stolen kisses, hurried embraces, whispered words dripping with betrayal. One video in particular chilled Michael to the bone. Richard, leaning against the mantel of his fireplace, smirked at Claire and said, "He's too simple-minded to catch on. Honestly, Claire, sometimes I wonder why you even married him. He's not a fighter. He's a ghost." Claire laughed softly, running her fingers through her hair. "Don't be cruel. He's good in his own way, just not enough." Michael watched the clip in silence, his hands trembling as he paused the video. His reflection in the darkened laptop screen showed eyes so hollow, they almost frightened him. But instead of breaking, the words hardened something inside him. Not enough. They had underestimated him for the last time. The next twist came from Grace. She visited Michael one afternoon, holding an old envelope in her hands. Her face was grave. "Michael, there's something I never told you about your father. Years ago, before you were born, he had another affair with a woman he worked with. I found letters once, love notes. I forgave him because I thought it was a mistake, but now I see it was a pattern." Michael stared at her, the pieces clicking into place. Richard wasn't just betraying him now. This was who he had always been, a man who believed he was untouchable, that consequences were for other people. Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I stayed silent then. I won't stay silent now. Tell me what to do, Michael, and I'll stand with you." Michael took her hand gently. "You've carried his sins long enough, Mom. Let me carry this one. But when the time comes, I'll need your strength." That night, Michael began assembling everything. The recordings, the videos, the receipts, the old letters Grace had kept hidden for decades. Piece by piece, he built a case so airtight it would be impossible to deny. But he didn't want to simply confront them. No, that would be too easy. He wanted them to feel the slow tightening of a noose, to sense the trap closing before it snapped shut. So he began dropping subtle hints. At dinner, he'd remark casually, "Funny how some secrets always find their way out, no matter how deep you bury them." Claire would stiffen, her fork pausing midair. Richard's eyes would narrow slightly, but he would say nothing. At another gathering, Michael raised a glass and said, "To truth, the one guest at the table no one can dismiss." The words hung heavy, and Grace watched quietly, understanding far more than the others realized. But the most brutal twist came when Daniel handed Michael a final piece of footage, a recording from a hidden camera inside Richard's office. In it, Richard leaned back in his chair, smirking at Claire. When he finally finds out, it'll break him. And when it does, he'll disappear. Men like him always do. Claire, instead of protesting, simply whispered, "Then we'll finally be free." Michael watched the clip alone, in the dark. His chest ached, but his eyes burned with cold determination. He whispered to himself, "Disappear? No, I'll rise so high, you'll choke on the dust of what you tried to bury." From that night forward, Michael's plan accelerated. He began cultivating allies, Daniel with his evidence, Grace with her long-suppressed truths, even Emily and Jacob in subtle ways, shielding them from the coming storm. He started making quiet arrangements at work, too, ensuring he could weather the fallout once the family scandal erupted. But he also played his role to perfection. To Claire and Richard, he remained the same passive Michael, quiet, thoughtful, perhaps a little distant, but never openly suspicious. They laughed behind his back, unaware that every laugh dug their grave deeper. Then came the chilling moment when Claire, emboldened by Richard's arrogance, confronted Michael directly. One evening, after a strained silence, she blurted, "Michael, if you knew something, if you suspected something, would you tell me?" Michael met her gaze steadily. "Why would I need to tell you something you already know?" Her lips parted in shock, but he said nothing more, turning away and leaving her standing frozen in the kitchen. That night, Claire tossed and turned, haunted by the weight of his words. Richard, too, began sensing something was wrong. He confronted Claire privately. "Has he said anything? Has he done anything unusual?" Claire shook her head nervously. "No, but sometimes I think he knows." Richard sneered. "Even if he does, what can he do? He's nothing without me. Always has been." But neither of them realized a storm looming on the horizon, its winds already rattling the fragile walls of their lives. Michael was ready. The pieces were in place. The stage was set. And soon, the curtain would rise on their downfall. The days that followed unfolded with the eerie calm of a chessboard mid-game. Every piece in place, every move carefully calculated, yet the tension so thick it pressed against the air like an invisible storm. Michael had everything he needed: the recordings, the receipts, the photographs, and his mother's testimony. But he knew a direct strike too soon would only lead to chaos. Timing mattered, precision mattered, and above all, humiliation mattered. He wanted them to feel the collapse, not like a sudden lightning strike, but like the slow crumbling of walls around them, leaving them with no escape. Michael began with small, almost imperceptible steps. He called Richard's office one morning, using a distorted voice, and left a cryptic message with the secretary. "Tell Mr. Bennett the past doesn't stay buried forever." No name, no context, just enough to rattle. Richard brushed it off with bravado, but that night he couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the words in his head, haunted by the idea of someone digging where they shouldn't. Claire noticed his restlessness, but instead of comfort, she felt her own anxiety rise. What if someone had seen them? What if the secret wasn't so secret after all? Meanwhile, Michael quietly began to reclaim control over his home. He didn't confront Claire directly, but he altered his behavior in ways that unsettled her. He changed the passcodes on the family bank accounts, claiming it was for security reasons. He redirected important mail to a private P.O. box, leaving her locked out of information she once freely accessed. He even updated the children's school records, listing himself and Grace as the only emergency contacts. Claire noticed all these shifts, but every time she asked, Michael answered calmly, just making sure everything's protected. But the most unsettling moment for Claire came late one evening when she entered the kitchen to find Michael sitting at the table, quietly reading. He didn't look up when he spoke, his tone low and deliberate. "You know, it's fascinating how betrayal works. People think it's a secret, but secrets have weight, and sooner or later they leave a trail." Claire's breath caught. "Michael, what are you talking about?" He finally looked up, his eyes unreadable. "I'm talking about truth, the kind that doesn't need to be shouted to be heard." She tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out hollow. For the first time, Claire began to fear him, not because of anger or violence, but because of his unsettling composure. It was as though he was 3 steps ahead, and she couldn't see the board he was playing on. At the same time, Richard was beginning to feel cracks in his empire. A rumor spread in his company. Whispers of financial irregularities, of someone leaking sensitive documents to investors. He stormed into the office one morning, demanding answers, firing accusations left and right. What he didn't know was that Michael, through Daniel, had anonymously leaked a carefully selected packet of information. Not enough to destroy the company, but enough to make Richard sweat, to make him doubt who he could trust. The paranoia began to eat at him. He snapped at employees, lashed out at his secretary, and even berated Claire during one of their private meetings. "This is your fault," he hissed. "You're distracting me. If he finds out..." Claire cut him off sharply, her own nerves frayed. "Don't you dare blame me. You promised me freedom. You promised me a life better than the one I had. Instead, all I feel is trapped." For a brief moment, Richard faltered. It was the first crack in their bond, the first sign that the affair wasn't built on passion alone, but on mutual escape, a flimsy foundation that Michael now threatened to shatter. But Michael wasn't done. He arranged for an anonymous delivery to arrive at Claire's workplace, a simple envelope. Inside was a single photograph, her and Richard, caught in an embrace outside a restaurant. No note, no sender, just a damning image. Her hands trembled as she shoved the envelope into her purse, panic rising like bile in her throat. She couldn't show it to Richard. He'd accuse her of carelessness. She couldn't show it to Michael. He already knew. She was trapped in silence, suffocating under invisible eyes. That night, she came home unusually quiet. Michael studied her across the dinner table, noting how she avoided his gaze, how her fork barely touched her plate. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to, but Grace noticed. After dinner, she pulled Michael aside. "She's unraveling," she whispered. "Good," Michael replied softly. "Let her feel what it's like to choke on her own lies." Yet the deeper Michael went, the more dangerous the game became. Daniel called him one evening with a warning. "Michael, I need to be honest with you. Richard isn't stupid. He's starting to suspect he's being watched. If he catches wind of me, of us, this could spiral fast." Michael considered this, then spoke with chilling clarity. "Then let him suspect. Fear is a sharper weapon than truth. As long as he doesn't know where the blade is, he can't defend himself." But Michael underestimated one thing: Richard's ability to strike back. Within days, Richard had his own investigators digging into Michael's life. They uncovered nothing scandalous, but that wasn't the point. Richard intended to fabricate, to create the illusion of failure, weakness, instability. He began whispering to business associates that Michael was unwell, that stress had driven him to paranoia, that he was no longer reliable. Slowly, a shadow began to creep over Michael's professional reputation. When Michael discovered this, he didn't rage. He didn't panic. Instead, he smiled. "Good," he murmured. "He's playing his hand too early." For Michael had already anticipated this move. He had secured alliances at work, colleagues who respected him, men and women who had seen his quiet strength over the years. When the rumors spread, these allies pushed back, subtly but firmly, undermining Richard's narrative. What Richard didn't know was that Michael had been building his own fortress, brick by brick, long before this war began. The real twist came 2 weeks later, a family gathering Richard himself had organized. He wanted to present himself as untouchable, as the patriarch still in control. The house was filled with relatives, business partners, and friends. Laughter echoed to the halls. Wine flowed freely, and Richard strutted like a king. Michael played his role perfectly, smiling politely, engaging in small talk, never revealing the storm brewing in his eyes. But midway through dinner, the lights dimmed, just for a moment, and when they flickered back, the large screen in the dining hall crackled to life. At first, it seemed like a mistake, static filling the screen. But then, a grainy video appeared. Richard's voice, unmistakable, filled the room. "He's too simple-minded to catch on. Honestly, Claire, sometimes I wonder why you even married him. He's not a fighter. He's a ghost." Gasps rippled through the guests. Claire's face turned ashen, her fork clattering against the plate. Richard surged to his feet, roaring, "Turn that off! Now!" But the video continued, now showing another clip. Richard and Claire in a stolen embrace, whispering promises of a future together. The room fell into stunned silence. The guests stared, some in disbelief, others in thinly veiled fascination, at the scandal unraveling before their eyes. Grace sat rigid, her face pale but her eyes burning with restrained fury. Michael, however, remained perfectly still. He didn't even glance at the screen. Instead, he looked directly at Richard, his voice calm but cutting. "Funny thing about ghosts, Richard, they see everything." The room erupted into chaos. Shouts, whispers, phones snapping pictures. Richard barked orders, demanding the footage be stopped, but the damage was done. Claire fled the table, her face buried in her hands. Richard's empire control had cracked in public, in front of everyone who mattered. But for Michael, this was only the beginning. The true revenge wasn't in exposing them. It was in dismantling them piece by piece, until nothing remained but ruins. And as the guests whispered, as the scandal spread like wildfire, Michael sat in silence, already planning his next move. The fallout from the dinner party rippled outward like shockwaves from an earthquake, shattering the fragile illusions Richard and Claire had worked so hard to maintain. What had once been whispered suspicions now became undeniable truth, played out on a giant screen in front of relatives, colleagues, and so-called friends. Within hours, the whispers turned to stories, and by the next morning, stories became headlines in private social circles. The Bennetts were no longer the image of refinement and control. They were a spectacle of betrayal, humiliation, and disgrace. Michael, however, remained unerringly calm in the days that followed. He went about his routines as though nothing had changed, working at his office, visiting Grace, taking walks with his children. But beneath the surface, he was watching, listening, waiting. For Michael understood that revenge wasn't about one climactic explosion. It was about the slow bleed, the steady dismantling of everything his enemies valued until they were left hollow, gasping for air in the ruins of their own making. Claire was the first to crumble. Her workplace, once a sanctuary where she could escape her double life, became a prison of judgmental stares. The anonymous photograph had already shaken her, but after the dinner, her colleagues no longer tried to hide their disdain. Conversations stopped when she entered a room. Invitations vanished. Her supervisor, who once favored her, now treated her with cold detachment. It wasn't long before whispers about her inappropriate conduct reached the higher-ups. She found herself sidelined from important projects, excluded from meetings, her career slipping away like sand through trembling fingers. Every evening, when she returned home, the silence was suffocating. Michael never yelled, never confronted her directly about the affair. Instead, he was courteous, distant, polite to a fault. He cooked meals, checked the children's homework, maintained the house with efficiency, and never once raised his voice. To Claire, this was far worse than anger. Anger she could have fought against, justified, or deflected. But his silence, his calm detachment, that gnawed at her sanity, reducing her to a paranoid wreck. She often caught herself watching him from across the room, searching for cracks in his mask, desperate to know what he was planning. Richard, on the other hand, was spiraling in his own way. The leak at the dinner had fractured his professional standing. Board members who once admired his decisiveness now questioned his judgment. Investors whispered about instability, about leadership compromised by scandal. To Richard, perception was everything, and now, perception was slipping beyond his control. He lashed out at his subordinates, threatened legal action against anyone spreading false rumors, and even tried to track the source of the video that had ruined his carefully curated evening. But every lead he pursued ended in smoke, as though the saboteur were always 2 steps ahead. And he wasn't wrong. Michael was. What Richard and Claire failed to realize was that Michael had cultivated patience like an art form. He wasn't interested in quick victories. No, he wanted to turn their own fears into weapons. Each move was designed to make them unravel themselves. And so, his next step wasn't another dramatic public exposure. It was subtler, more insidious. It began with small, unsettling intrusions into their private world. Richard received an anonymous package at his office. Inside, a simple black chess piece. The king. No note, no explanation. Claire came home one evening to find her wedding dress, long packed away in the attic, laid neatly on their bed with a single wilted rose resting on top. She screamed, demanded to know if Michael had done it, but he merely raised an eyebrow and replied, "Why would I?" The ambiguity, the inability to trace the source, left her trembling in fear. Meanwhile, Grace's role in all of this grew more complicated. She had been Michael's quiet ally from the start, helping him uncover the truth, feeding him information and supporting him emotionally. But as she watched her mother unravel, a war began within her. On one hand, she despised Claire for betrayal. On the other, she couldn't deny the pangs of pity when she saw her mother sitting alone at the dinner table, eyes red from crying, hands shaking as she reached for a glass of wine. Grace often found herself torn between loyalty to her father and the faint, painful remnants of love for her mother. One night, unable to hold it in any longer, she confronted Michael. "Dad, how far are you going to take this?" Michael studied her, his expression unreadable. "Far enough that they'll never forget. But isn't this enough?" Grace's voice cracked. "You've already exposed them. Everyone knows. She's breaking apart, and Richard, he's losing everything. Isn't that what you wanted?" Michael's eyes darkened. "What I wanted, Grace, was for them to feel what I felt, to know the weight of betrayal. And right now, they're only tasting the beginning. You don't rebuild trust with a single strike. You tear down the foundation, brick by brick, until the house they built on lies collapses into dust." Grace flinched at the cold certainty in his voice. For the first time, she wondered if her father's thirst for justice was morphing into something else, something darker. Richard, sensing his grip on power weakening, made a desperate move. He reached out to Claire, demanding they meet in secret. They met at a secluded park late at night, both cloaked in desperation. "We need to fight back," Richard hissed. "Whoever's behind this, they're destroying us. If we don't act, we'll both lose everything." Claire, exhausted and paranoid, shook her head. "You don't understand. He knows, Richard. Michael knows. I can see it in his eyes. He's playing with us." Richard grabbed her arm, his eyes blazing. "Then we outplay him. I've handled worse than this in business. We hit him where it hurts, his credibility, his career. We make him the villain. If we can convince the world he's unstable, paranoid, obsessed, then all of this," he gestured vaguely, "turns back on him." Claire hesitated, torn between fear and self-preservation. Deep down, she knew Richard cared less about her and more about salvaging his empire. But part of her, the desperate part, clung to his words. Perhaps if Michael was discredited, if his calm facade could be painted as madness, she could escape the noose tightening around her neck. What neither of them realized was that Michael anticipated this very move. In fact, he was counting on it. The next week, rumors began to swirl about Michael's mental state. Whisper campaigns suggested he was obsessive, that he was fabricating stories about his wife, that his calm demeanor was masking something unstable. Claire even went so far as to speak quietly to a neighbor, feigning concern. "I just don't know if he's well. Sometimes I worry about his mind." She said it with just the right mix of sadness and fear to plant doubt. But Michael was prepared. He had already documented everything: videos, photographs, receipts, testimonies. He released them not through a dramatic public display this time, but through carefully orchestrated leaks. A business contact here, a journalist there, a whispered story to the right ears. Each piece was verifiable, undeniable. Each one dismantled the rumors before they could take root. The brilliance of the strategy lay in its precision. Richard and Claire were trying to convince the world Michael was unstable, yet every attempt they made only highlighted their own duplicity when weighed against the evidence. The more they pushed, the more they looked like liars scrambling to deflect blame. But then came the twist no one expected. Late one night, as Michael sat in his study, sorting to the last of the evidence, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. He frowned, opened it, and froze. It was a single line: "You're not the only one watching." Attached was a photo, grainy, taken from outside his own house. It showed him through the window, sitting at his desk. For the first time, Michael felt a chill creep down his spine. Up until now, he had been the hunter, the one pulling the strings. But this message suggested otherwise. Someone else was in the game, someone who had been watching him just as carefully as he had been watching Richard and Claire. He leaned back in his chair, mind racing. Who was it? Another enemy? A hidden ally? Or someone entirely unexpected? Whatever the answer, Michael realized something chilling. The game was far from over, and the next move might not be his to make. The photo haunted Michael long after he first saw it. He saved it, enlarged it, studied the angle of the shot, the grain of the pixels, the faint reflection on the glass. Whoever had taken it wasn't careless. It wasn't the work of some gossip-hungry neighbor with a cheap phone. The framing was deliberate, the timing precise. The message, "You're not the only one watching," wasn't a warning. It was a challenge. For years, Michael had mastered the art of control. He dictated the rhythm of his revenge, set the pace of destruction, manipulated every move with precision. But now, for the first time, the game board fell unstable. Someone else had entered the arena, and their intentions remained hidden. Were they a rival, trying to sabotage his vengeance? An ally, sending a signal? Or perhaps, more disturbingly, a shadow from his past resurfacing at the worst possible moment? He didn't tell Grace about the message. He couldn't, not yet. She was already growing uneasy with how far he was pushing things, questioning whether justice was turning into cruelty. If she knew someone else was stalking them, it would only widen the crack between them. Instead, Michael locked the knowledge away in the vault of his mind, adding it to the growing web of calculations that never left him. But the intruder's presence began to reveal itself in subtle ways. A car parked too long at the corner of their street. A flicker of movement in the garden when no one should have been there. Even the children whispered about strange noises at night, though Michael dismissed them, not wanting to feed their fears. Deep down, however, he knew they weren't imagining it. Someone was circling closer, probing the edges of his world, testing his defenses. Richard, meanwhile, was collapsing under the weight of his own downfall. His board had grown restless, investors impatient. Whispers about scandal and betrayal had reached competitors, and vultures circled overhead, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But what gnawed at Richard most wasn't professional ruin. It was a gnawing suspicion that someone, somewhere, was orchestrating his downfall with deliberate cruelty. He still didn't know how the dinner video had leaked. He didn't know who had mailed him the black chess piece. But his instinct screamed Michael's name. The problem was, instinct wasn't evidence. And without evidence, Richard couldn't strike back without looking desperate. But desperation makes dangerous men. Late one night, Richard sat in his office, surrounded by the wreckage of half-empty whiskey bottles and stacks of documents he no longer cared to read. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, hollow-eyed and furious. That was when the door creaked open, and Claire stepped inside. She looked worse than he did. Dark circles under her eyes, hair unkempt, voice trembling. "Richard, it's getting worse. He knows everything. He's not just destroying us. He's enjoying it. I can feel it. And now, I think someone else is involved." Richard's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Claire hesitated, wringing her hands. "I don't know. I keep hearing things, seeing things. I thought it was just my paranoia, but what if it isn't? What if there's more than one person coming after us?" Richard studied her carefully, then leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. "Then we find them, all of them, and we crush them." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were photographs, grainy surveillance shots of Michael, taken from a distance. I had someone tail him, just to be sure. And guess what? He's not alone. Someone else is watching him too. Someone we don't know. Claire's blood ran cold. Then it's not just him? "No," Richard muttered, "which means we have two enemies. Or one enemy with two faces. Either way, we're done waiting. We hit first." It was the first time Claire saw him truly rattled. Not by the scandal, not by the rumors, but by the realization that they weren't merely victims of Michael's revenge. They were pieces in a larger game, and someone else was moving them around the board. Meanwhile, Michael began noticing a pattern in the intrusions. Every time he orchestrated a strike against Richard and Claire, a new reminder appeared. Another photo in his mailbox. Another message slipped under his door. Always short, always taunting. "Do you think you're the only one capable of playing this game? Every king eventually falls. Look behind you, Michael." The last one shook him the most, not because of the words, but because of the timing. He found the note taped to his car windshield while picking up Grace from the university library. Whoever left it knew where he was, knew his routines, knew the people he loved. It was no longer just about him. Grace noticed his tension that night. "Dad, what's wrong?" she pressed, studying his face as they sat in the living room. "You've been different, not just focused, nervous." Michael forced a smile. "Just work stress." But Grace didn't buy it. She had inherited his instincts, his ability to see through facades. "You're lying," she whispered. "Something's happening, isn't it? Something you're not telling me." He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet, Grace. Not yet." And so the burden grew heavier. Michael was trapped in a game of mirrors, his enemies plotting to destroy him, an unknown watcher circling from the shadows, and his own daughter beginning to question whether the father she admired was slipping into obsession. The next twist came unexpectedly. One evening, as Claire was returning home from work, she found an envelope taped to her front door. No return address, no markings. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a name scrawled across it. Evelyn Shaw. Beneath the name, a short message. "Ask your husband who she really is." Claire froze. The name meant nothing to her, but the insinuation was enough to plant a seed of doubt. She carried the paper inside, confronted Richard, and demanded answers. His reaction stunned her. His face went pale, his jaw tightened, and for the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "It was on the door." "Who is she?" Claire pressed. Richard didn't answer immediately. Instead, he poured himself a drink, downed it in one gulp, and muttered, "Someone I thought was gone. Someone who should have stayed gone." Claire's heart pounded. "Richard, what aren't you telling me?" But Richard refused to elaborate. He locked himself in his study, leaving Claire with nothing but the name and her growing suspicion that the web of secrets extended far beyond the affair. Michael, too, received a message that night. This time, it wasn't a photo or a note. It was a phone call. The voice on the other end was distorted, mechanical, but the words were chilling. "You think you're the hunter, Michael, but you've been prey for a long time. Evelyn sends her regards." The line went dead. Michael sat frozen, phone pressed his ear, heart hammering in his chest. Evelyn Shaw, a name he hadn't heard in over a decade, a name tied to a chapter of his past he had buried so deep, even Grace didn't know about it. And now, somehow, that ghost had returned. The name Evelyn Shaw lingered like smoke in Michael's mind, suffocating and impossible to ignore. He hadn't spoken it aloud in more than 15 years. He had forced it into the deepest vault of memory, locking it behind steel and shadow. Yet here it was again, written on a sheet of paper for Claire to find, whispered into his ear through a distorted voice that dripped with malice. It wasn't a coincidence. It was deliberate, a signal that the past he had buried was clawing its way back to the surface. Michael didn't sleep that night. Instead, he paced the length of his study, running through fragments of memory he wished he could forget. Evelyn Shaw had once been brilliant, dangerous, and utterly unpredictable. Back when Michael was still building his empire and Richard was his closest ally, Evelyn was the woman who walked between them like fire and dry grass. She was not merely a lover or a colleague. She was a storm disguised as flesh. She had been with Richard first, but she had turned her attention to Michael when she sensed his hunger for power matched her own. For months, the three of them had danced in a treacherous triangle, each one aware of the danger but unable to step away. And then Evelyn vanished. Her disappearance was sudden, brutal, and unresolved. One day she was there, sharp-tongued, laughing, plotting, and the next she was gone without a trace. Rumors swirled that she had run away with stolen money, that she had crossed the wrong people, that she had been silenced permanently. But neither Richard nor Michael spoke her name again. It was safer that way. Safer for their reputations, their businesses, their futures. Evelyn was a wound they sealed over with silence, pretending she had never existed. Until now, Michael wasn't the only one haunted. Across the city, Richard sat slumped at his desk, the paper bearing Evelyn's name clutched in his hand. His thoughts swirled with dread, not just of her, but of what her reappearance meant. If Evelyn was alive, then she hadn't forgotten. She had always been vengeful, always kept score, and if she had returned now, when Michael was orchestrating his revenge, it meant only one thing. She intended to join the game, and she didn't care who burned in the process. But Richard's fear was not just about the past. There was something else, something deeper, that he had never confessed to Claire or anyone else. Evelyn had known things, secrets that could not see the light of day. If she revealed them, his life wouldn't just crumble, it would be obliterated beyond repair. Claire sensed her husband's unease but mistook it for guilt. She had been restless since receiving the envelope, pacing her home like a caged animal. The betrayal she had lived through was already unbearable, but now there was another woman's name, another ghost rising from the ashes of Richard's lies. She demanded answers, cornered him in the dim glow of their living room. But he gave her nothing, just silence, broken by the clink of glass as he poured another drink. That silence was more damning than any confession. Meanwhile, Michael began noticing a new pattern. The messages from the Watcher, whoever they were, grew bolder. No longer content with photos or notes, they escalated into intrusions that struck at his sense of safety. His office was broken into, nothing stolen, but his files rearranged with surgical precision. His daughter Grace's name appeared in a message scratched into the paint of his car. "She's next if you keep lying." The implication was clear. This was not just about him anymore. Evelyn, or whoever was invoking her name, was reaching into the heart of his family. Grace herself was caught in the crossfire without knowing it. She had begun to investigate her father's late-night habits, his hidden conversations, the flicker of dread in his eyes whenever the phone rang. She was clever, perhaps too clever, and her instincts told her he was hiding something colossal. She searched his study when he wasn't home, found the fragments of letters and photographs he thought he had hidden away. Though she didn't yet understand, she pieced together enough to know that Evelyn Shaw was more than just a name. She was a pivot around which everything now turned. The twist came one stormy evening when Michael received another call. The same distorted voice, the same cold, deliberate cadence. "You tried to erase me, Michael. You and Richard both. But shadows don't disappear. They wait, they grow, and now it's my turn." Michael forced his voice steady. "What do you want?" The voice paused, as though savoring the moment. "I want you to suffer. But more than that, I want the truth exposed. Every lie, every betrayal, every secret you buried. I want Grace to know the father she worships isn't the man he pretends to be." For the first time, Michael felt true panic. Not for his own safety, not even for his revenge, but for his daughter. Grace was the one innocent thread in this tangled web, the only soul he protected from the darkness of his past. If Evelyn, or whoever spoke in her name, was targeting her, then everything he'd built, every sacrifice he had made, risked crumbling. But the voice wasn't finished. "Meet me, Michael. Alone. Tomorrow, midnight. You know the place." Michael did know. The old warehouse by the docks, where once long ago, he and Richard had confronted Evelyn in a storm of accusations and threats the night before she disappeared. His heart clenched at the memory. If she was truly alive, if she had returned, then meeting her there would mean facing a past he had run from for nearly 2 decades. And yet, he couldn't refuse. Richard, however, was already one step ahead. He too had received a message. His instructions delivered not by phone but by letter slipped under his office door. His note said something different. "Tomorrow midnight. The warehouse. Come if you want to end this." 2 men, 2 summons, 1 location. Whoever Evelyn Shaw truly was now, flesh and blood, or just a phantom pulling strings, she had drawn them back to the place where it all began. Claire discovered the letter in Richard's jacket pocket before he left. She followed him quietly, determined to uncover the truth. And Grace, suspicious of her father's agitation, did the same. Neither man knew they were being shadowed by the very women who had the most to lose. As the night deepened, the warehouse loomed like a monument to forgotten sins. Broken windows rattled in the wind. Rusted beams groaned with the weight of years. Inside, darkness stretched like a living thing. Richard arrived first, his face pale but his jaw set, determination and fear battling his eyes. Michael followed soon after, every step echoing with memories he had sworn to erase. They locked eyes in the gloom. 2 former friends turned bitter enemies, united only by the ghost of a woman who refused to stay buried. And then, from the shadows, a figure stepped forward. A woman, alive, her voice, low and steady, cut through the silence like a blade. "Did you really think you could erase me?" Evelyn Shaw had returned. The moment Evelyn Shaw stepped into the dim light of the warehouse, the air seemed to contract. The years had not dulled her presence. If anything, they had sharpened into something colder, more commanding. She was not the woman Michael remembered, nor the one Richard had once worshipped. Time had etched lines of both beauty and cruelty into her face, her eyes gleaming with the feral intelligence of someone who had suffered, survived, and come back stronger. She was not a ghost, not a whisper, not a memory. She was flesh and blood, and she had returned with an agenda written in fire. Richard's breath caught in his throat as he saw her. His lips parted, forming her name in a hoarse whisper he hadn't allowed himself to utter in decades. Evelyn. Michael's reaction was different. He didn't speak. He simply stared, frozen in a blend of disbelief and dread, his mind flicking through every possible explanation. Illusion, trick, imposter. Yet the truth burned in him. This was no impersonation. This was Evelyn Shaw, the woman whose vanishing had been the cornerstone of their silence. She smiled faintly, though it held no warmth. Surprised? You shouldn't be. You of all people should know shadows don't stay buried. They grow, they spread, and when the time is right, they step back into the light. Neither man spoke. The silence in the warehouse was deafening, broken only by the distant echo of waves slapping against the dock outside. Evelyn stepped closer, her heels clicking against the concrete, each sound like a nail hammered into their past. She stopped midway between them, her gaze flickering from one face to the other. You both thought you were rid of me. You both believed you could erase me, replace me, bury me under your wealth and your lies. But you were wrong, because I never left. I watched, I waited, and now, her voice hardened, now it's my turn. Richard's hands clenched into fists at his sides, veins standing out on his arms. What do you want from us? He demanded, though his tone cracked with unease. What do I want? Evelyn tilted her head, her smile widening into something chilling. Justice, revenge, the truth, call it what you will. But let me ask you, Richard, do you still remember that night? The night you swore to protect me. The night you swore to silence me if I ever crossed you. Michael's gaze snapped toward Richard, confusion flashing in his eyes. What is she talking about? Richard flinched but said nothing. His silence was louder than any denial. Evelyn chuckled softly, a sound like broken glass. Oh, he didn't tell you, did he, Michael? You always believed you were the mastermind, the one pulling the strings. But you never realized how much Richard wanted me gone. You thought I disappeared because I betrayed you. But the truth, she leaned closer, her voice dropping into a whisper that cut through the air, is that Richard betrayed me. Michael's eyes narrowed, suspicion now bleeding into rage. He turned fully toward Richard. Is it true? Richard shook his head violently, his eyes darting, his composure unraveling. She's lying. She always lied. You know that, Michael. Evelyn laughed, and the sound was terrifying. Oh, no, Richard. I don't need to lie anymore. Not when the truth will ruin you far more beautifully. She straightened, her expression transforming into something almost regal. You tried to kill me that night. Both of you. Don't you remember? The fire, the ropes, the threats whispered in the dark? You thought you left me to die. The silence that followed was suffocating. Michael's face paled. His memories, fragmented, long repressed, began to stir. The storm, the shouts, the violence. He remembered Evelyn's scream, the way Richard had dragged him away, insisting it was over. He had buried it, convinced himself she had run. But now the pieces fell into place, jagged and merciless. You survived, Michael murmured, his voice barely audible. Evelyn's eyes locked on his, blazing with fury and triumph. I didn't just survive. I rebuilt myself from the ashes you left me in. And while you both rose to power, built your empires, lived your lives, I carved my revenge. Every step, every choice, every shadow I moved and was building to this moment. Neither man noticed movement in the rafters above, where Claire and Grace had crept into the warehouse through a broken stairwell. They crouched in the dark, holding their breath, listening to every word. Claire's heart pounded in her chest as she heard Evelyn's accusations, her eyes flicking to Richard below. She had always suspected her husband's secrets ran deeper than adultery, but this was monstrous. Grace, meanwhile, could barely process what she was hearing. Her father, her pillar, her protector, was being accused of trying to kill a woman. The foundation of her trust began to splinter with every revelation. She gripped the beam beside her so tightly her knuckles turned white, her mind spinning with betrayal. Down below, Richard finally broke. His voice, hoarse and furious, cut through the silence. You don't get to rewrite history. You were the one who destroyed us, Evelyn. You played us against each other. You tore everything apart with your greed, your lies, your... Enough! Evelyn's scream reverberated through the warehouse, raw and electric. Her eyes burned with tears, but her voice was steel. You call me greedy? You call me a liar? Look at yourselves. You used me, discarded me, and when I became inconvenient, you tried to erase me. You don't get to play the victim now. Michael's voice was low, almost trembling. What do you want from us, Evelyn? If it's money, you can have it. If it's power. Power? Evelyn cut him off with a laugh, so sharp it made Grace flinch above. Do you think this is about power? No, Michael. I don't want your empire. I don't want your fortune. I want your legacy. I want your daughters, your wives, your precious reputations to see the truth. I want the people who love you to know what kind of monsters you really are. Her words hung in the air like poison. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Claire stepped forward from the shadows above, unable to remain hidden any longer. Her voice, steady but trembling with rage, rang through the warehouse. Then start with me. All heads snapped upward. Richard's face drained of color as he saw her standing there, eyes blazing with fury and betrayal. Behind her, Grace stumbled forward into the light, her face pale, tears streaking her cheeks. Michael's heart shattered at the sight of his daughter, realizing she had heard everything. The warehouse, once a place of shadows and secrets, was now flooded with a brutal light of truth. Evelyn smiled slowly, almost serenely, as she looked from Claire to Grace. Perfect, she whispered. The audience I wanted most. And then, as if the night hadn't already twisted enough, the creak of another door echoed through the warehouse. Heavy footsteps approached from the darkness, measured and deliberate. Evelyn's expression faltered for the first time. Out of the shadows stepped a man neither Richard nor Michael recognized immediately, but Evelyn's face hardened with recognition and fear. You, she hissed. The man smiled coldly. Hello, Evelyn. Did you really think you were the only ghost who came back? The heavy footsteps echoed to the cavernous warehouse, each one hammering into the fragile silence left after Evelyn's revelation. The man who stepped into the light seemed both familiar and alien at once. His posture was rigid, his suit immaculate despite the dust of the dockside air, and his eyes carried the weight of someone who had lived in exile too long. He was not young, but age had not softened him. It had carved him into something harder, sharper, like a blade forged in fire and then hidden away, waiting to be drawn again. Michael's brow furrowed as he studied him. There was something haunting about the man's face, a faint memory gnawing at the edges of his mind. Richard, on the other hand, visibly stiffened, his jaw locking, his body unconsciously recoiling as if he had seen a ghost. Claire and Grace, still perched above, exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that another storm was about to break. Evelyn's expression, however, told the true story. For the first time since she had revealed herself, her composure cracked. Her lips curled back in a sneer that barely concealed a flicker of unease in her eyes. You shouldn't be here, she hissed, her voice shaking with rage that masked a thin edge of fear. The man chuckled darkly, his smile devoid of warmth. Funny, that's exactly what they said about you. Yet here we are, both of us back from the dead, standing in the ruins of the lives we once lost. Michael's voice, cold and sharp, sliced through the tension. Who the hell are you? The man turned his gaze toward him, and in that instant Michael saw it. The resemblance, faint but undeniable. His heart lurched in his chest. The eyes, the shape of the mouth. He had seen those features once before in an old photograph, one buried deep in the family's archives and spoken of in whispers. My name, the man said slowly, savoring every syllable, is Alexander Shaw, Evelyn's brother, the one you both thought was buried with her secrets. Richard swore under his breath, his hand instinctively going inside of his coat as if reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Evelyn, however, stepped forward, her body trembling with fury. You don't belong here, Alexander. You should have stayed hidden. You don't know what you're doing. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing, Alexander replied, his voice smooth, dangerous, and laced with venom. I've spent the last 20 years rotting in the shadows because of you. Do you remember, Evelyn? Do you remember how you begged me to help you that night? Do you remember how you promised me we'd escape together? That you'd stand by me no matter what? And then... His voice broke, rage seeping into cracks. You left me behind. You let them believe I was gone. You let them bury me while you clawed your way back into the world. Michael's head spun. Evelyn's story had been damning enough. But now Alexander's words carved another wound into the already bleeding past. He looked from one sibling to the other, searching for truth in faces twisted by betrayal. Evelyn's jaw tightened, her silence more telling than any admission. "You betrayed him too," Richard said suddenly, his voice trembling between horror and a perverse satisfaction. He turned on Evelyn with wild eyes. "You lied to me. You lied to Michael. And you even lied to your own brother. How many lives did you ruin, Evelyn? How many bodies did you bury in your climb for power?" Evelyn's eyes snapped toward him, blazing. "Shut your mouth, Richard. You don't get to lecture me. You tried to kill me. Don't think I've forgotten." "Maybe I should have tried harder," Richard spat. The words cracked through the air like a gunshot, and for a moment, the warehouse seemed to vibrate with the weight of everything unsaid. Claire's heart pounded in her ears, her eyes fixed on her husband below. Every new revelation was another knife, cutting deeper into the fabric of the man she thought she knew. Grace, standing rigid beside her, felt her entire world unravel. Her father was no hero. Her family was no sanctuary. It was a web of blood and lies, and she was caught in the middle. Alexander stepped closer, his gaze sweeping across Richard and Michael before returning to Evelyn. "You see, that's the beauty of it, sister. You thought you were the only one capable of vengeance. You thought you were orchestrating some grand finale. But you forgot that you're not the only Shaw who knows how to survive betrayal." "What do you want?" Michael asked, his voice hoarse, though there was steel beneath it. Alexander's smile widened, but it was a cruel, humorless expression. "I want the truth to be more than whispers. I want the empire you built on lies to crumble, not just for Evelyn's revenge, but for mine. Because while she wants your legacy destroyed, I want something far greater. I want your bloodline to choke on the sins you tried to bury. Every child, every heir, every innocent who thought they were untouchable. I want them to carry the weight of your crimes." Grace flinched as his words struck her like a physical blow. For the first time, she realized she was not just collateral damage. She was a target. The realization clawed through her chest, leaving her breathless. Claire instinctively reached for her daughter, pulling her back slightly into the shadows, but it was too late. Alexander's eyes had already flicked upward, catching the movement. His smile deepened. Well, he said softly, almost to himself. "Looks like the next generation decided to join the show." Richard's head snapped upward, his heart nearly stopping as he saw Claire and Grace silhouetted in the rafters. Panic flooded his veins. "Get out of here," he shouted, his voice raw, desperate, unlike anything Claire had ever heard from him. But neither she nor Grace moved. Their legs felt rooted to the beams, their eyes locked on the battlefield below. Evelyn turned her head slowly, her expression shifting into something unreadable as she saw them. For the briefest moment, her eyes softened, not with love, but with something more dangerous. Calculation. "Perfect," Evelyn whispered again, this time louder, her voice dripping with malice. "Now we can finish this the right way." And then, without warning, the warehouse lights flickered violently before plunging the room into near darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a generator groaned, the sound of metal grinding against metal filling the air. The sudden shadow swallowed everyone whole. In the confusion, the alliances that seemed so clear only seconds before dissolved into chaos. Michael shouted for Grace. Richard called for Claire. Evelyn's voice cut through the dark, commanding, furious. Alexander's laughter echoed like a predator circling unseen prey. And then came the sound. A gun cocking close, too close, followed by a single word whispered into the dark. "Choose." The warehouse was a tomb of shadows. The emergency light flickered once, sputtering weakly, then died again. The only sounds were ragged breaths, the creak of metal beams and the low, serpentine laughter of Alexander as his voice slithered through the dark. "Choose," he repeated, his whisper ricocheting from wall to wall. "Choose who will live and who will die." Michael's pulse thundered. His hand searched blindly through the dark until his fingers brushed the cold edge of a rusted steel beam. Beside him, he could hear Richard's frantic breaths, Claire's muffled sob as she held Grace close, Evelyn's low growl of frustration, and Alexander's footsteps pacing, deliberate, confident. Then, a spark. A small flame flared in the darkness. Evelyn's lighter. It cast her face in an eerie glow, her eyes glinting like molten steel. "Stop hiding, Alexander," she snarled. "If you want me, take me. Leave them out of this." But Alexander didn't answer her directly. Instead, his voice floated upward toward the rafters. "Grace, can you hear me?" Grace froze, her entire body trembling as she clung to her mother. Alexander's voice softened, almost gentle, though the malice underneath made her blood run cold. You're innocent, aren't you? Pure, untouched by their sins. But do you know the truth, child? Do you know why Evelyn came back? It wasn't just revenge, it was to claim what she lost. Grace's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? Claire pulled her closer. Don't listen to him. But Alexander cut her off with a sharp bark of laughter. Oh, she should listen. Because the truth, dear Grace, is that you are not Richard's daughter. You're Evelyn's. The words detonated like a bomb. Silence crashed down in the wake of his revelation. Claire staggered back as if struck, her arms loosening around Grace. Richard's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing, unable to form words. Michael's heart slammed against his ribs as he stared at Evelyn, searching her face for denial, for anything. But Evelyn said nothing. She only stared at Grace, her expression unreadable, her silence louder than any admission. Grace felt the ground drop away beneath her. Her chest tightened, her vision blurred with tears. No, he's lying. Tell me he's lying, she screamed at Evelyn. Still, Evelyn did not answer. Richard's voice finally broke the silence, a raw, broken whisper. All these years you let me believe she was mine? Evelyn's eyes flicked toward him, cold and merciless. You never deserve her. Richard staggered as if she had plunged a knife into his chest. Claire clutched her own mouth, a strangled sob escaping. And Grace, unable to bear the weight of it, tore herself from her mother's arms, her screams echoing through the cavernous space. Alexander laughed again, louder this time, reveling in the carnage. There it is, the truth that destroys everything. Not bullets, not fire, just words. That's all it takes to ruin you all. But he had underestimated one thing. Michael. In the chaos, Michael had moved silently through the shadows, his rage sharpened to a single point. He had no weapon but his bare hands and the steel resolve burning in his veins. He lunged from the dark, tackling Alexander to the ground. They crashed with a sickening thud. Alexander's laughter cut short as Michael's fists rained down on him. You don't get to use her. Michael roared. You don't get to decide her life. Alexander snarled, clawing at him. But Michael's fury was unstoppable. For the first time, Evelyn shouted, not in rage, but in fear. Michael, stop. Don't kill him. But Michael didn't listen. His fists rose and fell, again and again, until Alexander's movement slowed, his resistance faltering. Finally, with a last desperate effort, Alexander drove a hidden blade upward, aiming for Michael's chest. And then, a gunshot shattered the air. Everyone froze. Alexander's body jerked violently, the knife clattering from his hand. His eyes went wide in shock as blood blossomed across his chest. Slowly, his head lolled back against the concrete floor. The echo of the gunshot faded into silence. Michael turned, chest heaving, to see who had pulled the trigger. It was Grace. She stood trembling, the heavy pistol in her hands, shaking violently, tears streaming down her face. Her eyes were locked on Alexander's lifeless body, her voice breaking in a whisper. He wasn't going to stop. He wasn't going to stop. Evelyn stared at her daughter, her secret, her blood, and for the first time in years, her expression cracked. Not rage, not vengeance, but something raw, something like pride mingled with grief. You're stronger than I ever was, Evelyn whispered. But Grace recoiled from her words, dropping the gun as though it burned her. She backed toward Claire, shaking her head furiously. No, I'm nothing like you. Nothing. Evelyn's face hardened again, the moment of vulnerability gone. She turned her gaze back to Richard, to Claire, to Michael. It doesn't matter what happens to me. The truth is out now. Grace is mine. She always will be. Michael stepped forward, his voice iron. No, she will decide who she belongs to. Not you, not Richard, not Alexander. Only her. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. For the first time, Evelyn had no reply. The distant wail of sirens began to echo outside the warehouse. Red and blue lights flickered faintly through the cracked windows, growing brighter with each passing second. Evelyn's jaw clenched, her body tense, as if she were deciding whether to fight or flee. But then, with a slow, deliberate breath, she raised her hands. It doesn't matter if you cage me, she said softly, her voice like a curse. My blood runs in her veins, and one day she'll understand me. The doors burst open. Armed officers flooded the warehouse, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Within seconds, Evelyn Shaw, the ghost who returned, the woman who had orchestrated so much pain, was surrounded. As they led her away in chains, her eyes never left Grace's. And Grace, trembling but unbroken, held her gaze until Evelyn disappeared into the night. The warehouse was silent again, save for the crackle of the generator dying at last. The family stood together in the wreckage, broken, bloodied, but alive. Nothing would ever be the same. But as Grace took her mother's hand and looked toward the rising dawn through shattered glass, one thing was certain. The cycle of vengeance had ended with her.